This is my first comic, and this is the story of how I made my first comic. It's a story of accomplishment, but it's also a story of failure and perseverance. And I hope that in sharing my experience, maybe you'll hear something useful for your own creative work. To start, you have to meet me in high school. High school was an okay time for me. All things considered, I had a pretty good life, even if I wasn't always really that happy of a kid. Like anybody else, I had my highs and lows. But the best part of my life was always stories, getting lost in them, reading them, or watching movies and television, which was mainly what I was doing in high school. And also writing. I was writing screenplays at the time. I really wanted to write stories, to just make movies. Even though I never intended to pursue it as a career back then, it was still the thing that occupied most of my time when I wasn't wasting it playing video games. Then, in my senior year, my English teacher assigned us the book Mouse by Art Spiegelman to read. For those of you who don't know it, it's an amazing graphic novel, and it's the comic that made me want to try writing comics. After I read that book, I realized that comics, a medium I'd been reading my entire life, could do so much more than just entertain. Well, I had read Marvel comics and Star Wars comics and even Franco-Belgian comics like Asterix, which was one of my favorite series. I never felt that they really pushed the envelope in terms of narrative. I didn't know that there was that much potential for a story in comics. But Mouse completely shattered that perception for me and showed me just how much you could do with a comic book, with a medium I didn't realize that I had always loved. So I set out to write comics. I pretty much stopped writing film just as soon as I read that book, and immediately jumped in full steam ahead onto the comic book train. That's a train I would totally ride, by the way, if it actually existed. That sounds like a lot of fun. We cut ahead a little while later to after I had learned about how comic book scripts were written, and eventually I felt like I had a great idea for my first comic. Having ideas was never really my problem, but I felt like the one I came up with was special. It was a supernatural horror story with intrigue and mystery, and I thought it was going to be my big break. Part of what I thought made it really cool was that it was supposed to be just one episode of a series of interconnected one-shot stories. Stories that would be told from start to end in just 24 pages, and each episode would shine a spotlight on this world that I had developed, this world of supernatural thriller and intrigue, like I said. It was perfect because at 24 pages, the project would be shorter and easier to make. It wouldn't be as much of a hurdle to overcome in terms of writing, and it'd be much more affordable to hire an artist to make it. Because from the outset, I already knew I wanted to do this independently. I'd seen platforms like Kickstarter and thought, hey, that seemed cool, I want to try that, and really admired people who had been able to just do things without waiting for gatekeepers to approve of their work. So I wrote it again, and then edited a whole bunch of times. And it took a while to write something that I was really happy with, but I designed a first installment that I thought would be cool, that would make readers intrigued in the world that was there. I put out an ad on digital webbing searching for an artist, received a whole bunch of emails that I sorted through, and found one artist that I really liked and who I could also afford, and we decided to work together. I paid them to create some sample pages of what the comic would look like, and I was blown away. Those were the first pages of art visualizing a world that I'd created that I'd ever seen or received. It was an incredible feeling. It's such an amazing collaborative process, and it's part of the reason I still love comics today. But maybe that's a whole story for another time. Really, the important part here is that I found this great collaborator, and then I didn't have the funds to pay myself for the rest of the production. So we launched a Kickstarter. I filmed the video. I was in college by this point, and with the help of some friends, I filmed the Kickstarter video while there and put together the campaign. and launched right around my birthday in December of that year. This is a clip from the video itself, and it's crazy to see just how much has changed since then. Hi, my name is Jeremy Malol. I'm a college student living in Portland, Oregon, and I've been writing for as long as I can remember. Earlier this year, I started writing a comic called Screws Loose. It's a 24-page, one-shot, supernatural thriller that follows a team of 4 mercenaries who find a mysterious crate, and that's where the story gets interesting. So my hair is a bit shorter, obviously, but after we launched the campaign, it was successful. It didn't take a ton of people either. I think we only had 50 or so backers, but we managed to raise the $3,000. I had a lot of friends and family support that made it possible, and I was pleased to see even random people who found my project scrolling by support the project. At this time, this was back in 2011, and Kickstarter wasn't a developed comics ecosystem. It really only emerged, it really only came into prominence in 2012, and so I won't go as far as to say I was ahead of the curve. I'd seen and supported other comics on the website before, but it was just the early days. There wasn't as much attention on the site then, and there weren't a ton of huge projects regularly coming out. Raising the money was awesome. I was so stoked. I had an artist secured. We'd already produced some of the pages. We could just go full steam ahead, produce the rest. It would be in black and white, so there wouldn't be a colorist. We had everything we needed. We were good to go, and now with the money, I would make my first comic at the age of 18, and I felt sure that this would be the start of my career. But then, a week after we funded, the artist on the project dropped out. I didn't have a contract or anything. I didn't approach it super professionally. I just didn't know any better. And I didn't begrudge the artist. I wasn't paying them a lot. I couldn't, even despite what we raised. And the offer that they'd gotten was so much larger than what I could pay them that, you know, I couldn't ask them not to do the book. That's how I felt. I couldn't ask them to just focus on my work, even if we had agreed upon it, because the opportunity they had was so much larger. Today, maybe I would think differently, but I might also, you know, I would know to pay an artist a better rate, to have a contract. I would just know better. Ultimately, I don't regret the decision. I think we ended up making a great book, which I'll talk about, but it was a heavy blow. It felt like all my momentum was just taken away. Right after the highest high came just the lowest low. I had to go back and tell all the Kickstarter backers who had supported, and even some of them purchased original pages of art from this artist, that those original pages would never be created, that the artist wouldn't make that comic. And I felt like a failure, like I was barely out of the gates and I had already failed. What followed were a very difficult 6 months, essentially. From February to July of that year, which at this point was 2012, I searched for artists. I needed to find an artist I could afford with the budget that I had. The artist needed to be good enough so that the backers wouldn't be frustrated that they'd be receiving rewards from this artist instead. I didn't want the quality of the project to suffer. I didn't want my first potential readers and fans to be upset or betrayed by me or with me. I was already so frustrated with myself that it would take so much longer than I had initially planned just to get the comic done. Eventually, in July, after those 7 months of painful searching, I found the right artist. His name was Daniel Wong, and he's an incredible artist. Here's some of his work. He seemed excited about the project. We discussed a rate that I would be able to afford to pay him. I actually put more money into the project beyond what we had raised on the Kickstarter in order to be able to work with him. And I excitedly announced the news to the backers who had supported the project. But the momentum had been long gone, and I didn't do a good job of starting it back up. While the project was flailing, I had started rewriting pieces of it, trying to improve it further, and that was a mistake. Caught up in the rewrites, it took extra time before we could get started in earnest on the work of creating the actual comic together, even after Daniel had agreed. And so a combination of that and just the way life gets in the way and the fact that art can take a long time to produce, we had a really long period of work ahead of us. In fact, it took from that July in 2012 all the way until October of the following year of 2013 to finish making just those 24 pages of comics. And that was tough. That was really difficult. I say now that I'm not a patient person. I was just forced to learn patience. I'd started the project in 2011 when I was still in high school. And by the time October 2013 rolled around, not only had I gone to college, but I had dropped out and decided to focus on pursuing a path of creating comics and of being an entrepreneur and just carving out my own path, really. And in all that time, I felt a lot of the time like I was a failure or a fraud because I couldn't even make a single 24-page story. I mean, years passed and my first comic was still in production. In the moment, it was just really difficult. And looking back on it, I'm really proud of myself. I'm proud that I didn't give up, that I didn't lose motivation. Even if I was less motivated at times, I never stopped. I never gave up. I mean, the proof is that I'm still making comics today, even if they do take a while to get made. October of 2013, I announced excitedly to the Kickstarter backers that the book is done and that I'll finally be able to start getting it to them. I've got plenty of time to do the shipping. I've dropped out of school. I'm just focusing on writing and doing some internships around LA. So in November, I finally ship out the comics. I package them all up, put all the rewards together, and take them to the post office. And I finally feel like a real comic book creator. Even though I never put my creative aspirations on hold, I continue to write new stories and to develop other projects while Screws Loose was in production. I slowed down a lot because I didn't feel right starting another Kickstarter while I was still fulfilling my first one. I felt like I just didn't have the trust, that it wasn't right to the audience, that it would seem like I was distracted even if there was nothing else I could do to make the project go any faster. After we started shipping in November of that year, everything got to backers by January of 2014. It was a little more really than 3 years since the project started, and all that for a 24-page comic. I think that's evidence of, more than anything, that it can take a long time to get to where you want to go, but that if you don't stop, you can still get there. And while the project isn't a masterpiece, I'm still really proud of the work that I was able to do on it as a writer and of the process it went through and the collaborators I was able to work with on that story. Now, at the time I'm recording this video, it's February 2019. It's been more than 5 years since I finally delivered Screws Loose to backers, to my first readers, to the friends, family, and randos on the internet, like you, I guess, that decided to support what I'm doing. And it's been 8 years since I first had ambitions of telling stories in comic book form. That whole series I'd planned, those interconnected one-shots in this supernatural universe, never happened. By the time that I thought about making new works in that storyline, I had changed so much as a writer. I felt I had developed further that I didn't want to tell those kinds of stories. They didn't have, I guess, the aspects of my voice that I had developed by that point. They were just not a core part of those projects. They felt like projects, stories developed by someone else. They just weren't representative of the kind of writer that I'd become by then. And really, I think more than anything, I was excited about the new projects I'd started to think about, to put together. I was excited by the way that my mind was starting to think about story. And it felt like going back to a project that I thought about so long ago would be like a step backwards. Today, I understand that it's not like that I can update the project and that I have more confidence in myself as a writer to ensure the quality of what I turn out, of stories that I tell, whether they're in comics or in movies and television or even in prose. And, despite all the work that I've been doing, I still haven't had my big break. I'm still just nobody making videos on YouTube, sitting in my room, playing Dungeons and Dragons and going LARPing. This is actually the new jacket for my LARP character. Yeah, I'm just a nerd who loves stories, and hopefully, it won't take as long relatively to tell the stories I'm working on now, because it's my favorite thing to do. Um, and I feel like I get to be most myself when I'm writing. That's never changed. That's always been true. And I'm really glad that I stuck to it. As hard as it was, as frustrating as it was, I have a comic now. A comic I can look back on and be proud, and one that I can't hold up right now because I've had to pack away my entire room into the garage because the house is having major renovations due to a ton of water damage. Um, yeah, so I procrastinated on making this video a ton. And then when I finally sit down to make it, when the right mood struck, I forgot to keep one of the copies of the comic here next to me to show it to you. But it's there, I promise. It exists. It's a full book, and I still have copies because I printed a whole bunch. And it just wouldn't have been possible without all the help that I'd gotten, not only from the backers, but family, friends, and other acquaintances I met along the way who gave me advice and, just made the whole thing possible, really. So that's what I've got to say. Sometimes, even when you know where you're going, it just takes a lot longer than you expect to get there. I think that's really the message that stood out to me, that resonated with me and has stayed with me from that experience. But if it's something you were really passionate about, if it's something you really care about, it's still worth it. I definitely wouldn't trade it away. Like I said, it feels like me. Alright, thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I make new videos every week about creative and nerdy topics. My name's Jeremy, by the way, if you didn't catch that. I'd love for you to stick around if you want to see more videos like this or about the other random nerdy stuff I talk about, like Dungeons and Dragons. So make sure you subscribe if you're interested. And if you want more videos like this, or if you have an experience of your own to share, I'd love to read about it. So leave a comment and let me know. I read and reply to everything. So please say what's up. And if I don't see you in the comment section, I guess I'll see you next week. Bye.